Darius Cole, a retired Navy SEAL, had long sought peace after years of serving in the military. Settling in a quiet, small town, he embraced a life far removed from the violence and chaos that had defined his past. Working as a mechanic, Darius enjoyed the simplicity of fixing cars, the hum of engines, and the comfort of solitude. He lived alone in a modest house on the edge of town, a place he had hoped would offer him respite from the dangers he once faced on the battlefield. Although Darius kept to himself, he wasn't blind to the world around him. His presence in the town as one of the few black residents hadn't gone unnoticed, and the quiet undercurrents of racial tension simmered beneath the surface. The Iron Fangs, a notorious local gang known for their violent tendencies and deep-seated hatred of black people, had been making their presence felt for months. They harassed the black residents of the town, causing fear and uncertainty wherever they went. Darius, however, chose to remain outside their crosshairs, preferring to avoid confrontation and live peacefully. But peace, it seemed, was fleeting. The gang's harassment of the black community grew bolder. Stories of intimidation, threats, and violence spread, and Darius could feel the weight of their presence in the town. He had seen their graffiti on walls, heard whispers of their escalating cruelty, and witnessed the looks they gave him as they passed by, sizing him up. Though he tried to ignore it, he knew the time was coming when the gang would target him, just like they had others, and he wasn't wrong. One fateful evening, Darius returned home after a long day at work, exhausted and eager for the comfort of his bed. As he turned down the road to his house, he noticed something was wrong. The familiar outline of his home, usually so comforting, was now an ominous silhouette against the darkened sky. The orange glow of flames flickered from the windows, and the acrid smell of smoke filled the air. Panic surged through him as he raced toward his home, but it was already too late. The Iron Fangs had attacked. They had torched his house, reducing everything he had worked for to ash. His possessions, his memories, the sanctuary he had built, were now consumed by the fire. He had no time to dwell on his loss, though. The gang members were still there, and they hadn't finished their work. As Darius reached the front door, the door burst open, and a group of the gang members emerged from the shadows. They saw him, a lone black man, and decided he was no different from the others they had terrorized before. With brutal force, they shoved him to the ground, kicking and punching him with a viciousness that only those who harbored deep hatred could muster. Darius tried to fight back, but his strength, depleted by exhaustion and shock, failed him. The gang members weren't just trying to scare him. They were determined to make an example out of him. They laughed as they beat him, thinking they were finally breaking him, thinking that his quiet life had made him weak. The blows were hard, unrelenting, and suffocating. And then, when they were satisfied with their work, they left him on the ground, battered and broken, assuming he was dead. But Darius wasn't dead. He had survived things far worse than this, things that would have broken lesser men. As the gang drove away, leaving him in the dirt, Darius slowly stirred, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. He had been through hell before, and this would be no different. His home was gone, his body bruised, but he was still alive, and that meant he still had a chance to make things right. The fire that had destroyed his home was no longer the only thing burning inside him. Rage, determination, and a thirst for justice surged through him. The Iron Fangs had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated the wrong man. Darius wasn't just another victim to be pushed around. He was a Navy SEAL, a warrior forged in battle, a man who had spent years honing his skills to survive the deadliest of situations. As the days passed, Darius set about his mission. He knew he couldn't just confront the gang head-on. They were dangerous, well-organized, and protected by corrupt officials. But he had trained for moments like this. He would have to be stealthy, tactical, and calculated. One by one, he would take them down, dismantling the gang from the inside. The people who had hurt him, who had taken everything he had, would learn the hard way that there were consequences for their actions. Darius had no plans to stop until the Iron Fangs were no more. The small town that had once seemed so peaceful now had a different feeling to it. It wasn't just a town, it was a battleground, and Darius was ready to fight. His revenge wouldn't just be for him. It would be for every person they had terrorized, for every life they had destroyed. And with that, the hunt began. Darius Cole, now fully recovered from the brutal attack and the destruction of his home, prepares for the task ahead. The quiet mechanic who once lived an ordinary life is now a man with a singular purpose: revenge. He knows that the gang, the Iron Fangs, won't just sit back and allow him to dismantle their empire. They will come after him, and he must be ready. His military training, the skills he once used on covert missions, now serve a new purpose: taking down those who have wronged him and the community. For days, Darius gathers intelligence, using his knowledge of tactics and surveillance to learn everything he can about the gang's operations. He moves quietly, observing from the shadows, watching the gang's every move without ever drawing attention to himself. His focus is razor-sharp as he tracks the locations of their hideouts, the times they meet, and the people who protect them. He studies the leaders, their routines, and their weaknesses, knowing that to strike, he must do so with precision and calculated timing. He uses every resource at his disposal: local connections, former military contacts, and his own innate sense of strategy. Slowly but surely, he pieces together the structure of the Iron Fangs, and it becomes clear that the gang's power is not just based on fear. It is reinforced by ties to the local law enforcement and town officials. This complicates things, but it only fuels Darius's resolve. As he gathers information, the first move comes. Darius identifies one of the gang's low-level members, a man who has been involved in various violent acts but has never been arrested due to the protection he receives. Darius's plan is simple: make an example of him, show the gang that he is coming for them, and that no one is safe. The attack is swift, clean, and ruthless. The man is found in a secluded spot, surrounded by a handful of his associates, but Darius is already there, hidden in plain sight. The takedown is flawless, silent, precise, and executed without hesitation. The gang member is left alive, but scared and disoriented. A message to the others. The word begins to spread. Someone is hunting the Iron Fangs. As the days pass, the gang becomes more paranoid, watching over their shoulders, unsure who is responsible for the attacks. Meanwhile, Darius continues his campaign in the shadows, taking out key members and cutting off their operations piece by piece. Each strike is calculated, targeting specific weaknesses and avoiding direct confrontation. He uses his knowledge of the town, its streets, and its people to his advantage. His military training allows him to be patient, always staying one step ahead, always prepared for the next move. The more he eliminates, the more the gang's grip on the town weakens. But with every success, the danger increases. The Iron Fangs grow desperate, sending out their own forces to find and eliminate the mysterious figure who is picking them off. Darius knows that the more attention he attracts, the more the gang will tighten their defenses. But he also knows that this is the price of justice. His war is just beginning, and with each step, he draws closer to the heart of the gang. He will continue until they are no more, until the Iron Fangs are nothing but a memory. The quiet town that once seemed peaceful is now a battlefield, and Darius Cole is the storm that will tear it apart. February 6, 3:28 p.m. Real 6-6. The battle between Darius Cole and the Iron Fangs had escalated into an all-out war. The gang, once confident in their dominance, now found themselves fighting for survival as their carefully constructed empire crumbled around them. Darius's attacks were growing bolder, more frequent, and increasingly destructive. Each strike sent a wave of fear through the gang, and the members began to realize they were no longer in control. They were being hunted by a ghost, an invisible force who had a singular goal: to erase them from existence. The leaders of the Iron Fangs, once secure in their power, now scrambled to defend what little influence they had left. They turned on each other, paranoid and desperate, but their attempts to maintain order only made them more vulnerable. The gang was unraveling from the inside, and Darius was watching it all unfold. He had been patient, calculating every move, and now the pieces were falling into place. He was closing in on the core of the operation, the leaders who had orchestrated the reign of terror that had torn his life apart. He knew that to end this, he needed to take them down one by one. But the final confrontation was drawing near. The reckoning would come when he faced the gang's most dangerous and untouchable member, Wyatt Grayson, the sadistic former cop who had been the mastermind behind the gang's rise to power. The more Darius eliminated key figures, the more Wyatt realized that the clock was ticking. He wasn't foolish enough to believe the gang's reputation would protect them forever. As the gang's enforcers were taken out and their operations shut down, Wyatt ordered his men to fortify their hideout. He gathered his most loyal followers, knowing that this would be the fight of their lives. They would not go down without a brutal and bloody fight, but Wyatt was growing nervous. He understood now that Darius was no ordinary man. He had seen the way Darius operated, silent, efficient, and merciless. Every death, every loss, had made the gang weaker, and the only way to stop him was to confront him head-on. But Wyatt also knew that Darius was the kind of man who would never fight on their terms. If they wanted to catch him, they would need to set a trap. Meanwhile, Darius had no intention of walking into the lion's den. He had learned everything he needed to know about Wyatt and his gang. He knew their strengths, their weaknesses, and the people who protected them. The final confrontation would take place on his terms, not theirs. He was prepared. Every piece of the puzzle had been laid out, and all that was left was the execution. Darius had learned long ago that the key to victory was not rushing into a fight. It was knowing when and how to strike. He would bring the fight to Wyatt, but he would do it on his own time. Darius's final assault began with a calculated attack on one of the gang's most secure hideouts. Wyatt's men, believing they were safe, were caught off guard when Darius struck. The carefully planned attack was swift and brutal. It was a clear message. Darius wasn't playing by the gang's rules anymore. As the gang scrambled to regroup, Darius slipped away into the shadows, evading capture and leaving the chaos behind him. The violence he had unleashed was only a prelude to what was to come. The next move came swiftly. Darius, having gathered enough intel, learned that Wyatt had relocated to a heavily fortified compound just outside of town. The compound was surrounded by guards, cameras, and a network of traps designed to deter any intruder. But none of that mattered to Darius. He knew the layout of the compound, the weaknesses in its defenses, and the timing of the guard shifts. It would be a delicate operation, but it was one that would end with Wyatt's downfall. Darius waited for the cover of night to execute his plan. The moon hung high in the sky as he approached the compound, his steps silent on the dirt path leading up to the gates. He bypassed the outer security with ease, knowing exactly where the blind spots were. The guards on the perimeter were unaware of his presence until it was too late. Darius moved like a shadow, a lethal force that struck with precision and disappeared without a trace. The guards were taken out quietly, one by one, their radios rendered useless as he disabled their communications. As he infiltrated deeper into the compound, Darius's focus remained unwavering. He knew Wyatt would be in the central building, the heart of the operation. The further he moved in, the more tension built in his chest. He could feel the weight of the moment. The final showdown was near. But it wasn't just about personal revenge anymore. This was about sending a message to the entire gang, to every corrupt individual who had ever used violence and hatred to control others. It was about justice, and Darius was determined to see it through. He reached the heart of the compound, where Wyatt and his most loyal followers were holed up, preparing for the final battle. Wyatt stood surrounded by his men, confident that his fortress would protect him. But he didn't know what was coming. Darius, having taken out the last of the guards, stood just outside the door, watching them through a crack in the wall. He had no intention of making it easy. The confrontation would be brutal, but it would be final. Darius's entrance was swift, and the chaos that followed was nothing short of explosive. Wyatt and his men were caught completely off guard. The fight was vicious, a true test of strength, will, and skill. But Darius had the upper hand. Every movement was calculated, every strike with deadly precision. He took down Wyatt's men with ruthless efficiency, closing in on the leader who had terrorized him and the town. In the final moments, Darius and Wyatt faced off in a brutal one-on-one battle. Wyatt, with his sadistic nature, fought with everything he had, but it was clear that Darius was the superior fighter. The fight ended with a decisive, violent conclusion. Darius had won, but the cost had been high. The Iron Fangs were finished, but the scars of the battle would remain. As Darius walked away from the wreckage, the town knew that it had been freed from the gang's grip. The silence that followed the storm was deafening. For Darius, however, there was no victory dance, no celebration. The fight had taken everything from him, but in the end, justice had been served. The town would heal, and so would he eventually. But for now, there was only the quiet certainty that the world was a little safer, and the Iron Fangs were no more. I hope you enjoy the stories. Make sure to like, subscribe, and follow for more.